I want you to picture a scenario that happens every single day in emergency rooms all over the world. It is high stakes, the adrenaline just pumping, and the clock, it's ticking louder than anything else in the room. A patient's just had a stroke. And the doctors, the nurses, they're all scrambling, shouting orders, just doing everything they can to restore blood flow to the brain.
Because in that exact situation, the phrase time is brain is not a metaphor at all. Every minute that blood flow is blocked, you're losing millions of neurons.
Exactly. It's that classic medical drama scene. But here's the part that nobody really talks about, and honestly, this is the part of the research that kept me up last night.
Oh.
Imagine the doctors win, they clear the blockage, blood comes rushing back in, and the family in the waiting room, they can finally sigh in relief. But that very moment of success, that rush of life-saving blood, it actually triggers a hidden trap.
It sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? But you're describing what's called reperfusion injury.
Right. The cure itself kicks off this harmful cascade of new damage, and that can leave a patient with, permanent paralysis, even though they technically survived.
Right.
It's just a biological paradox.
It's one of the cruelest ironies in all of neurology. You save the tissue from starving, only to find the rescue mission itself causes all this collateral damage.
But, and this is why we're here today, there is a massive breakthrough. It's coming out of Northwestern University, published just recently, January 2026. Scientists have developed a new injectable therapy, one that claims to solve this paradox.
And they gave it a very memorable name.
They did. They're calling it dancing molecules.
Which, I'll admit, sounds a little whimsical for such serious science. But underneath that name is some incredibly sophisticated nanotechnology.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly what these dancing molecules are, why on earth they have to dance to work, and how they manage to sneak past the brain's toughest security system, the blood-brain barrier.
And maybe most importantly, we need to talk about why this technology might change not just how we treat strokes, but potentially the future of things like ALS and traumatic brain injuries.
Okay, let's get into it. We need to start with the villain of the story, or I guess the accidental villain. You mentioned reperfusion injury. I think most of us, myself included, just assume a stroke is a plumbing issue. A pipe gets clogged, you unclog it, water flows, problem solved. Why isn't biology that simple?
Well, biology is almost never that simple. Let's look at the status quo. We're talking specifically about ischemic stroke here, which, it accounts for about 80% of all strokes in the U.S.
That's the clot type, right? Not a bleed.
Correct. A clot blocks a vessel. The brain cells downstream start starving for oxygen. So the current gold standard in medicine is to bust that clot. Doctors use drugs or even mechanical devices to physically get it out of there.
And you have to do that.
Oh, absolutely. It's 100% necessary. You have to open the vessel to prevent death.
Right, because if you don't clear the clot, the patient just dies right there on the table.
Exactly. But here is the catch-22. Those cells downstream, they've been starving. They're chemically very, very fragile. When that blood flow is suddenly restored, what we call reperfusion, it's just a massive shock to the system.
So it's not a gentle return to normal.
Not at all. Think of it like a dehydrated plant in the desert. If you suddenly blast it with a high-pressure fire hose, you're not watering it. You're destroying it. This sudden rush of oxygen, it creates oxidative stress, and it releases what Dr. Samuel Stupp, the lead researcher on this, calls bad actors.
Bad actors. That sounds...
It just refers to inflammatory signals and harmful molecules that flood the area. So you've stopped the immediate death from the clot, but you've started a secondary fire. This inflammation just burns through neurons, and it's a huge reason why stroke survivors often end up with lasting disabilities like speech loss or paralysis.
And that's the gap, isn't it? Dr. Ayush Batra, one of the co-authors, pointed this out. He said, we're good at flow restoration, fixing the plumbing, but we're terrible at neuroprotection, protecting the house from flooding when the water comes back on.
Precisely. That is the unmet need. We have the plumbing tools, but we lack the architectural support to keep the structure safe during the repair.
Enter the dancing molecules. Now, when I first read this, I thought dancing was just marketing jargon, like smart water or active wear, but they're referring to a literal physical property of the material, aren't they?
They are. We're talking about supramolecular therapeutic peptides, or STPs. But the breakthrough here isn't just the chemical composition. It's about the movement.
Help me visualize this. Why does a drug need to move? Usually we think of a pill as just a static thing that dissolves.
Well, think about how drugs interact with our cells. We usually teach this as a lock and key model, right? The drug is the key, and the receptor on the cell is the lock. You want the key to fit perfectly.
In Biology 101.
In a textbook, yes. But in the messy reality of the human body, those locks, the cellular receptors, they aren't frozen in place. They're vibrating, twisting, constantly moving around on the surface of the cell. They're incredibly dynamic.
So if you send in a rigid static drug molecule,
It's like trying to thread a needle while you're riding a wooden roller coaster. If your key is rigid and static, it might just bounce off, or the connection might be too weak to actually turn the lock.
I love that image. So the static drug just can't get a grip.
Exactly. The dancing molecules have what the researchers call tuned collective motion. They are chemically engineered to vibrate and shift. Because they're dynamic, they can sync up with those moving receptors.
They catch the rhythm.
In a way, yes. They can adjust and engage with those moving targets much more effectively. They're dynamic keys for dynamic locks. And that strong connection is what triggers the healing signal inside the cell.
That is just wild. It's like using chaos to fight chaos.
Yeah.
Now, I did notice the authors comparing this to a study they did back in 2021. They used similar tech to reverse paralysis in mice with spinal cord injuries. That was huge news back then. So why are they publishing again? What's different this time?
The delivery system. And honestly, this is the difference between a cool science experiment and a medicine that can actually save lives in an emergency. In that 2021 study, to get the drug to work, they had to inject it directly into the spine.
Which means surgery.
Right. And just think about that stroke scenario we started with. You're in an ambulance or a frantic ER. You cannot perform delicate spinal surgery while you're also trying to bust a clot. It's not logistically possible.
So the old version was effective but kind of useless in an emergency?
Essentially. The breakthrough in this January 2026 study is that they refined the chemistry so it can be an intravenous therapy.
Just a standard IV drip,
Yeah.
like saline.
Yes. It enters the bloodstream as a liquid. This eliminates the need for brain surgery. It makes the treatment systemic. It can travel through the whole body to find the problem.
Okay, but hold on. If it's traveling through the bloodstream, it has to face the final boss of neurology.
Yeah.
The blood-brain barrier. I thought the entire evolutionary point of that barrier was to keep things out of the brain.
It is. The blood-brain barrier, the BBB, is an incredibly effective wall. It blocks toxins, pathogens, and, unfortunately, about 98% of all potential brain drugs. It's the main reason so many promising Alzheimer's treatments fail. They just bounce off the wall.
So how did the dancing molecules get past the bouncer? Do they have a fake ID or something?
In a way, they exploit a distraction. Remember the reperfusion injury we talked about? When the stroke happens and that blood rushes back in, the BBB actually gets stressed out. It develops a transient opening.
The wall cracks a little bit.
Exactly. It becomes slightly leaky for a very short window of time. Now, usually you don't want to shove big molecules through there because they might clump up and cause another clot.
Right.
But the scientists dialed down the concentration of these peptides so they travel as these small liquid assemblies. Because they are dancing and flexible, they can slip through those temporary cracks without jamming the door.
Okay, so they sneak in while the door's ajar. But here's the part that felt like pure sci-fi to me. Once they're inside the brain tissue, they don't stay as a liquid, do they?
No, they don't. This is the self-assembly aspect. Once these small molecule clusters cross the barrier and get into the brain tissue, they find each other. They link up and form these extremely long, thin nanofibers.
They transform from water into a gel.
Effectively, yes. They build a structure that mimics the brain's own extracellular matrix.
The scaffolding that kind of holds the brain together.
Right. The brain isn't just a bag of cells. It has this structural mesh that holds everything in place. These nanofibers recreate that mesh, so you have a drug that travels as a liquid to get there, but then builds a house once it's inside to protect the cells.
That is incredible. There was a description of a microscopy video in the source material that really illustrated this. I want to paint that picture for everyone because it visualizes the battle that's happening inside your head.
It's a stunning visual. You're looking at the injury site in the brain. First, you see these angry red clusters just swarming, and that's the immune system's inflammatory response. Those are the bad actors trying to attack the stressed tissue.
And then the cavalry arrives.
The peptide treatment, which they tagged in blue, slips through the barrier, and immediately you see the behavior change. The brain's cleaning crew cells, called microglia, which are tagged green, start to interact with the blue fibers.
And what happens?
Instead of attacking the neurons, the microglia calm down. They switch from attack mode to repair mode.
So the blue gel basically tells the immune system, hey, nothing to see here, put the weapons down.
And it physically supports the neurons. The results in the mice were significant. They simulated a real-world stroke, blocked the flow, restored it, then gave the drug. The mice that got the dancing molecules had significantly less brain damage than the ones that didn't.
I have to ask, injecting self-assembling nanobots that turn into gel inside your brain, did they check for safety? I mean, did the mice grow a third ear or anything?
No, they monitored them for 7 days, no toxicity in the liver, kidneys, or spleen. And crucially, the body just broke the nanofibers down naturally after a few weeks. It seems to be fully biodegradable.
But the benefit wasn't just less damage. The paper used the word plasticity. That implies something more active than just shielding.
Plasticity is the holy grail. It's the brain's ability to rewire itself. And the study showed that this nanofiber gel actually signaled the axons, the long wires of the nerve cells, to start growing and reconnecting.
So we're not just putting out the fire, we're helping the carpenters rebuild the house.
That's the potential, yes. It moves the goalposts from mere survival to functional recovery.
Which is incredible. But, and you know there's a but coming.
And there is always a but.
We have to pivot from the sterile, perfect world of a university lab to the messy, bureaucratic reality of the medical system. Because even if this science is perfect, it has to survive the ER waiting room.
And that is a very different kind of barrier than the blood-brain barrier.
We looked at some of the commentary around this news, specifically from people who have actually navigated strokes. And there's a lot of friction there. It isn't just applause, it's frustration with the system.
I noticed that too. Take the comments from Jennifer and Fiona. They brought up what you could call the diagnosis gap.
Jennifer's story was terrifying. She said she'd had 2 strokes, rushed to the ER, lights and sirens, doing everything right, but the hospital protocol was to do a CT scan first.
And that's common. CT scans are fast and they're cheap. But the problem is, CT scans can miss early ischemic strokes. They're great for seeing bleeds, but less good for seeing clots in those early stages.
Exactly. So the doctor sent her home. They missed the diagnosis. She missed the treatment window.
And by the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. This is the logistical nightmare. This new dancing molecule therapy works, but just like the current clotbusters, it relies on being given immediately after reperfusion.
Lily, another commenter, put it so bluntly, even a miracle drug fails if hospital bureaucracy delays diagnosis.
She's right. We say time is brain. But if you have a drug that can repair the brain, yet it takes 4 hours to get an MRI approval, or the triage nurse misses the signs, the drug just sits on the shelf while the patient loses function.
It really highlights that medical progress isn't just about chemistry. It's about systems. We can invent the tool, but the system insurance protocols, scanner availability, staffing, that dictates if the tool ever reaches the patient.
And the stakes of that failure were really highlighted by another commenter, a non-imismus. They touched on the darker side of survival.
Yeah, that comment was heavy. They talked about the fear of surviving a stroke, but being left with severe disability.
They mentioned the concept of quality of life and bodily autonomy, the fear of being trapped in a body that doesn't work.
It underscores why Dr. Betra's focus on reducing disability is so emotionally weighted. It's not just about keeping the heart beating, it's about preserving the person.
Absolutely. If we can mitigate that secondary injury, we aren't just saving a life, we are saving a lifestyle. We're saving the ability to walk, to speak, to live independently. That is the difference between going home to your family or going to a long-term care facility.
So looking forward, this study was on mice, and it was acute. They only looked at the first week or so. What's the horizon here?
Well, scientifically, the next steps are all about the long game. The study covered 7 days. But as Dr. Batra noted, cognitive decline from a stroke can often happen months or even a year later.
Right. So can the mice actually function better 6 months from now?
Yeah.
Are they solving mazes any better?
That's what they need to find out. But Dr. Stupp, the inventor of the dancing molecules, he's thinking even bigger.
Bigger than stroke.
He suggests that because this delivery system works intravenously and because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it could be a game changer for other neurodegenerative diseases.
Like what?
ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and traumatic brain injury, or TBI.
Wow. TBI is huge. We're talking concussions, car accidents, sports injuries.
Exactly. Think about the mechanism. A massive concussion or a car accident causes inflammation and barrier leakage, very similar to the stroke reperfusion injury.
The door opens a crack there, too.
It does. If you can deliver regenerative medicine through a simple IV drip, you essentially have a platform technology for healing the brain. Imagine being able to treat a severe concussion in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, stopping the damage before it even sets in.
That would be a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah.
We'd be moving from wait and see to active repair.
We are moving from being plumbers, just clearing the pipes, to being architects. We are engaging with the biological structure of the brain itself.
It's so elegant. But I want to circle back to the core concept, the dancing.
Sure.
We're talking about synthetic molecules here, man-made stuff. But they work because they mimic the vibration and movement of biological life.
That is the key takeaway for me.
It makes me wonder, if we can engineer synthetic matter that mimics life well enough to fool our own cells into healing, are we approaching an era where we don't just treat the body, but, I don't know, program it like software?
I think we are. We are just patching the hardware anymore. We are uploading a software patch. We're telling the cells, execute repair code.
Which is a thrilling thought. But it leaves us with that lingering question from the user comments. We might have the software ready to go, but will our hospital systems, our hardware, upgrade fast enough to run it before the window closes for the patient?
That is the million-dollar question. Science moves at the speed of light. Bureaucracy moves at the speed of, well, bureaucracy.
That's a polite way to put it. This has been a fascinating look at the future of brain repair. From vibrating peptides to the ER waiting room, there's a lot to digest here.
It's a brave new world of nanomedicine for sure.
Thanks for diving deep with us. To our listener, hopefully your neurons are firing a little better after hearing this. We'll catch you on the next one.
Keep learning.